Hi everyone, this is Jason Burack of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. We've been Facebook friends for a while, and we actually met in person at the CPAC in 2011. He saw that I was covering marijuana, and he's actually worked for years in the marijuana industry in Colorado as it's got transitioned from medical marijuana into recreational marijuana. So Daniel Peffers is going to give us some insights into navigating this very difficult industry right now with all the rules changes, the regulations, and the taxes. So Daniel, thank you for joining me.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Now, Daniel, I want to get, for listeners to understand maybe your background, why did you move to Colorado, and how long have you worked in the marijuana and cannabis industry there?
I've worked in the marijuana industry in Colorado since September of 2014, so a few months after recreational marijuana became legal in Colorado. Since then, I've worked in pretty much every position in the industry. I've bud tended, trims. I've done license application renewals, bookkeeping, HR, packaging, transportation, pretty much anything you can think of. I've learned a lot over the past few years, just the different regulations that pertain specifically to the marijuana industry and the broader regulations of the federal government that cause things to be difficult in our day-to-day operations. Ultimately, why I moved out here was Indiana had an 8% unemployment rate, Denver had a 4.2% unemployment rate, and I could work in the marijuana industry and be considered an activist, and just keep that as my 9 to 5.
Sounds like you had a good plan, and it seems to be working, and you're having fun working in the industry now?
Mm-hmm. It's the Wild West out here. If you want to see capitalism on the small business scale, just work at a fever pitch. This is where you watch it.
Very cool. Now, I interviewed Chris Walsh from the Marijuana Business Daily a couple weeks ago, and a few of my listeners were complaining. They're saying I didn't talk enough about investment in the industry. But one point I want to get across, and I'm sure you could talk about this more than me, is that navigating all the difficult, large amount and increasing taxes and rules and regulations is really difficult. So before really you can invest any capital into the marijuana industry, you really have to understand these taxes, rules, and regulations, because aren't they always changing in Colorado? I read this book called, I read this book called Big Weed from the guy who started Green Man, which is you were telling me is a pretty large franchise of marijuana dispensaries in Colorado. And I think they also started something similar to like a weed microbrewery with a restaurant. You could go watch where the buds are being grown in an amphitheater. So tell our listeners then about like navigating through the rules, regulations, and taxes, and how, the states and the counties and the towns can maybe change the rules on you.
Okay, so the way that Colorado has their licensing set up is so that your right to smoke and your right to grow is regulated by the state constitution, while your ability to sell, manufacture, distribute is controlled by the municipal, by either the municipal government or what's known as the local licensing authority. Before you can get a state license in anything, selling, growing, manufacturing, you have to have your local licensing authority license, and that is where most of the maze of regulations comes in, the ones that are the hardest to follow. The state tends to try to keep more of a streamlined set of laws that are actually relatively easy to read, but at each locality you have additional taxes, excise collection, and in certain cases even overbearing transportation laws, such as the city of Boulder, which requires anytime marijuana is transported within city limits to notify the actual police department when you're leaving, what you're bringing, and where you're going. And that's in addition to the state requirements to track every product from seed to sale, so to speak. So it's every step of the process has at least 3 governments you have to worry about appeasing.
And how quickly, in your experience, have the rules changes or taxes changing? Are taxes going up every month? Are new taxes being added every month? Are the rules changes like so frequent that basically they're cumbersome and giving like an owner of one of these marijuana companies like huge headaches, and they have to hire lawyers and regulatory compliance and things like that?
Most of the companies still have to hire these lawyers and regulatory people just to maintain their normal day-to-day operations. As far as taxes go, Colorado kind of started them out high and hasn't really increased them a lot since then. Excise taxes have been holding pretty steady at 15%, but sales taxes, for instance, in like the city and county of Denver, when I first moved here, it was 12.12%. Now it is 23.75%. So that's almost a 3% increase right there. Overall, they tend to make these tax adjustments and packaging law changes on an annual basis. So, and on top of that, the regulators at the Marijuana Enforcement Division tend to speak directly with the owners of every company that works within this framework and explains to them what kind of regulations they are trying to move towards, what owners think the viability of enforcing a said regulation would be, and what its ultimate usefulness that would come from it. Packaging is what proves that you bought the product lawfully. It has all the warnings, and it's very, very strict. If you're missing one thing, the whole operation can be brought out of compliance. And those tend to change annually with about 3 to 6 months notice ahead of time, and they tend to roll those regulations in over the course of 2 months or so.
Now, Colorado is on track, I think, to make around an extra $200 million a year in tax revenues from marijuana. Is that correct?
That's the number I've been hearing quoted here and there.
And so basically, that's quite a bit of money to go from basically zero, where the whole product was illegal, the state wasn't making any money from it. Well, maybe if they seized it, right, and then sold it at an auction or something. But, that's a big tax increase. That's going to help their budget out quite a lot.
It's a big tax increase without any civil asset forfeiture.
Exactly.
You're very right about that.
Exactly. And, as you and me are both libertarians, we don't like civil asset forfeiture. Jeff Sessions is in favor of more civil asset forfeiture. Jeff Sessions just came out with, more ridiculous stuff today. I think he's a dinosaur from Reefer Madness.
He sure seems to play the part. And the part I want to see him play is the part that the Republicans said he would play of respecting states' rights. But that's just me.
Yeah, he's been this type of person for a very, very long time, anti-marijuana. I think he's so old that he probably actually did see Reefer Madness in high school, so.
Maybe his health class when they were teaching him abstinence-only education.
Well, I can just wonder what the sex ed videos were if they were showing the Reefer Madness propaganda video. So,
and probably just repeated the Reefer Madness propaganda video.
Anyways, though, Daniel, let's talk more about some of the Colorado laws. So I interviewed Chris Walsh about this, and he went somewhat in depth about this. So explain to our listeners. On a day-to-day business, are these marijuana dispensaries, are they allowed to take credit cards? How difficult is it for them to set up like a bank account at a large bank like a JP Morgan or Bank of America? What problems are they dealing with on a day-to-day basis? Basically
everything you've said right there. They've got to deal with making sure all their products properly labeled. As far as opening bank accounts and whatnot, even employees can have trouble opening bank accounts sometimes if direct deposit's involved. But as far as banking goes, cash is king. When you're working with a business that sells a Schedule I narcotic, then cash is really the most legal way to deal with this. Now, as many listeners probably have visited Colorado and can tell you, they have probably run their card in a dispensary before. And usually how that is done is it's run as an ATM transaction. So it's not even like a debit or inside the normal realm of just running a regular card. Basically, the ATM is the cash register, they run an ATM transaction, and then whatever is in excess of that ATM transaction gets refunded as change. So it's basically like you going to the ATM on site, just skipping a step. As far as banking goes, though, usually it's done with credit unions, people who are able to put in the resources and find out exactly the legality of when they can accept the business money and when they cannot.
So if you're an employee or one of my listeners out there moved to Colorado and got hired by a marijuana company, and for their paychecks they could not open up a separate bank account and have their paychecks delivered directly into their checking or savings accounts then from their employer?
They can if their employer offers direct deposit, but there's always the risk that the payroll company will stop doing business with the marijuana company for one reason or another, or that even your own bank account gets closed because of activity related to the sales of a Schedule I narcotic. It all really depends on the individual's bank's relationship with their own regulator. And that tends to be the name of the game, is how good of a relationship do you have with your regulator? That way, if you screw up and you have a good relationship, you're considered rehabilitatable. If you have a bad track record and the regulator sees that you screwed up, then they will shut you down. That's the general rule of thumb with these complex regulations.
If I flew into, somewhere in Colorado, Denver, somewhere else, as a marijuana tourist, and I wanted to pay with a credit card or a debit card at one of the stores, would I be allowed to, or would I have to use an ATM? Or is it cash only?
Cash is king. If you have cash on you, you'll be able to find recreational marijuana. If you want to spend a card, that's when it gets difficult, and that's when you start getting into some of the less compliant stores in the area, perhaps, because there's only so many right ways to accept a credit card in a dispensary, and there's a million wrong ways too. And a lot of these store owners are still just trying to learn how to follow the laws just like anyone else.
With all these, hassles that we've talked about in this interview, Daniel, whether it's, difficulty putting money in the bank for the store, figuring out which bank will even be your client, taking credit cards, it seems like the state of Colorado, if I was a small business owner there and I had some success in Colorado and I wanted to expand my business, maybe expand in Colorado, or maybe open up locations in California and start taking advantage of the recreational marijuana in California, it would seem to be very difficult to get outside capital for investor money, from either Wall Street or private equity or any foreign investors, due to these federal regulations.
The federal regulations definitely put a large barrier to entry for trying to invest in a marijuana business. However, if you are a Colorado resident, and you're in good standing, i.e. no felonies, no drug charges. Also, you can't hold a physician's medical license, and you cannot be a member of law enforcement. But if you follow those requirements and a few others, you are allowed to be an owner in a business or in a marijuana business license. If you are not a Colorado resident or one of those you do not qualify for, then you are not allowed to own a share in a marijuana business. Now, how you get Wall Street investors sometimes is you have these marijuana companies that say, all right, we've got two companies. One of them deals with holding the licenses, maintaining compliance, paying employees, et cetera, and the other one is a branding organization that holds all the properties for all the intellectual property rights, all the franchising rights, all the branding, all of that is held by a separate company. And that is seen to have investable value, and since it does not deal directly with Schedule I narcotic, is seen as legal to invest in. And I can actually give you guys a stock ticker. It's one of the companies out here that does trade. Their ticker is MSRT, which is for Mass Roots. They're another large organization. in the area, and they actually do have stock offerings if you want to just take a look and see how the marijuana stock actually performs.
That's interesting. Thanks. The Green Man in the book Big Weed, the Green Man brand, the company, they actually did exactly what you just walked our listeners through. They actually split the company, like you said, and so he wanted to open up additional stores besides just his first couple stores in the Denver area. He wanted to open up additional stores in Colorado, and then he was talking about looking into the other states as they were switching from medical marijuana into recreational, and I'm sure he's looking at selling maybe franchise rights or buying up existing marijuana businesses there and then converting them into the Green Man brand, a franchise like that too.
Oh yeah, there are a lot of organizations doing that. I've heard that Green Solution is offering the franchise model, and they have, to my knowledge, they have at least 2 stores in Illinois, one of them in Effingham. Both of them are medical stores. But even before people were trying to franchise and get out into other states, there was a huge practice that, since there was a finite supply of dispensary licenses, people would just go up to any shop they thought might not be doing so well revenue-wise and just offer them money on the spot, a lot of times cash. And, there were people who held out and kept their businesses and continued to grow them. And then there have been plenty of people who have sold their business as soon as they were granted the license and, had somewhat of a client base. Even if they weren't able to turn a profit there, they were able to sell their license at a profit. So that's all a pretty old game.
Have you seen or heard maybe rumors, or is there actual investment from some of the larger Canadian marijuana companies like your Canopy Growth or your Aurora, or there's Emerald Health. There's quite a few other larger Canadian ones that have either $1 billion or more in market cap. They have $200 million in cash in the bank. Are they going into Colorado? Have you heard about that, making investments there?
I haven't heard anything about Canadian businesses specifically. There are a few California businesses that have opened up shop out here under the same names even. Foria would be one notable example. And I know a few extraction companies have done that as well. Companies that produce lotions, topicals, concentrates, and edibles.
That would make sense that would make sense, Daniel, since so many Californians have been moving to Colorado from what I've heard.
Oh yeah. There are so many Californians out here. It's great. I love hanging out with Californians.
Do you guys have an In-N-Out burger yet?
We're actually getting one in Colorado Springs not too long from now. That was actually just announced.
Well, I'm not surprised. Let's just put it that way. But maybe they'll be moving back to California now that California just legalized recreational marijuana on January 1st. So
some of them undoubtedly will, but many of them, they're here to stay.
Yeah, the California market is projected, I think 2018, the projections I'm seeing is $600 million a year, and that's just to start. So the California market could potentially, Marijuana Business Daily is saying the California market could increase the growth of the legal marijuana market in the United States by more than 50% per year in terms of growth.
I definitely believe that would be a good starting number for California because it is one of the most populous states in the U.S., and they have had medical for so long. But always be a little skeptical of California marijuana because it did take them in excess of 10 years to pass recreational after passing medical.
Now, California, besides making it legal for recreational usage on January 1st, the voters did, also California, some small counties in California and some small cities in California have also decided to allow non-California residents to invest in marijuana businesses there. Do you think that's going to be really difficult given the federal laws?
I think it will be because municipal laws can never trump federal laws when it comes to the court of law. And that's where this is going to be taken if there's some sort of, let's say there's a business that's accepting outside investment from out of state, and then they decide they don't like their investors anymore, and then they decide to sue their investors for not lawfully investing in his company, even though the framework was there. So, I mean, there's always those chances, those kinds of opportunities to get a better understanding for what the feds feel like the law should be. But overall, I think you can't stop the outside investment. It's like trying to stop people from selling marijuana. Everybody wants marijuana. Everybody wants to be Pablo Escobar.
Well, I mean, the illegal part of the marijuana business per year in the United States is tens of billions, if not a lot more than that, right?
Oh, correct. The black market is still alive and well.
And one last question then about the market in Colorado. Do you think then all these rules, regulations, and taxes that the state of Colorado has put on you and the other people who work in the legal industry, do you think that's forced the prices of legal weed higher to the point where maybe some people or an increasing number of people are deciding, you know what, I'm paying too much for weed, I'd rather just buy it illegally? Do you think that's the case or no?
That's always the case. That's the thing is, everything has a value-added 15% excise tax on it, and then roughly 20% of sales taxes at a minimum. So right off the bat, everything is getting hit with a 35% tax increase. Now, the prices have been coming down as production has been increasing. Production increases have been outpacing demand largely over the past couple of years. So the prices have been coming down, but as long as there's that steep of a tax rate, there's always going to be a black market guy, and there's always going to be an incentive to ship marijuana out of state as long as there's a black market.
And do you think then that the quality of the product, the options of the weed, you know, all the different strains, the research and development that goes into it, do you think then that the legal weed in the legal weed in Colorado is of much higher quality compared to the stuff that's black market or illegal now that a lot of consumers are willing to pay the higher price?
It all depends on where you're talking. If you're getting black market weed right from the source, like you live in the Emerald Triangle in California, your weed's going to be better no matter what. But if you're like buying in New York or illegal weed in Florida, the weed is going to be a significantly lower quality, and it's going to be significantly more expensive. And a rumor I've heard is if it comes in packaging that's marked with something that validates that the product did come from Colorado, that it actually goes at a premium. So overall, I'd say legal weed is generally better than black market weed, because the black market weed is sold for production, then transported thousands of miles in unideal circumstances. Now, there are black market people out there who've been growing since way back in the black market days, and they're just super talented, and they're never going to join the legal side of things because that's not what they were raised on. And good for them, and some of them have some of the best weed available, but you're not going to find that just like flooding the streets of the black market. You just won't.
Is there anything else about the Colorado marijuana or cannabis industry that you wanted to tell our listeners about that you think I didn't ask you yet?
Have you been following the sweet leaf thing at all? Have
No.
you or your listeners?
No.
Okay.
Please explain it. Yeah.
So there was a recent multi-shot bust of a large company, Sweet Leaf. They had, I think the article cited 26 privileged licenses related to marijuana that they had suspended over a single incident. This incident in particular was several FBI, DEA, and local law enforcement agents simultaneously raided every Sweet Leaf location that I'm aware of in Denver, and shut them down for selling in excess of legal limits to customers. And this is one of the biggest regulatory hurdles for businesses, because every single one of your entry-level employees is your last line of defense for making sure that the customer is not buying too much marijuana, is not using it on the premises, is not trying to sell it to anybody, all the labeling is correct, and that the purchase has a receipt and is properly dated. What had happened was several of these agents had went in, bought weed, went back to their cars, stashed the weed that they purchased, and went directly back into the dispensary to buy more. So that they ended up in excess of their legal limit, which is 1 ounce in Colorado. And so 12 bud tenders ended up getting arrested, I believe, and I believe a lot of the owners are sheltered from wrongdoing in this circumstance, but it's definitely a case to watch because it is specifically dealing with Colorado's new looping law, the fact that you are not allowed to loop in and out of the store several times. And this is in an effort to cut down on trafficking marijuana out of state, which happens as a result of the excise taxes and the relative scarcity of marijuana in other localities in the U.S. But I just wanted to bring up that story as something that you guys might want to follow because this will set a lot of precedent as far as court cases go.
That's a very interesting story. Did you see the show Disjointed, the comedy show on Netflix about the marijuana dispensary?
Oh, yeah. All my friends hated it but me.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of the story you're telling me of that, where the last episode of the season where they hired the YouTube video people and they got a lot of views and then the people didn't know the laws and they thought they were being cool, handing out free joints, and then they handed them out to a kid, and that allowed the DEA to come in and, raid the place, steal all the plants and take all the money.
Oh, yeah. That is a real life scenario that could absolutely happen. There's all sorts of, marijuana is just a retail business, and the only way you're going to make money is getting people in the door. So there's all this advertising that people try to do, and not a lot of times do even the owners realize that sometimes this advertising can be illegal, and it is absolutely illegal to give away free weed. Like even if you get buy one get one free, by law you have to charge at least a penny so that it can be taxed.
Now you said it's a retail business. I remember in the Big Weed book that Colorado passed a law a couple years ago where you also had to own your own greenhouses. Is that still the case, or did they change that, where you had to be vertically integrated?
That was only for medical. Recreational never had such restrictions. Recreational, if you have a grow, you don't need to own a store. If you own a store, you don't need to own a grow. You can sell all the weed you grow. You can buy all the weed you sell. It's a great situation. Medical, though, the medical side of the industry came from the old caregivership laws. Basically, you would get your medical card. A doctor would prescribe you a number of plants you could grow at once, and you could either grow them yourself or you could sign over the rights to grow those plants to a caregiver who would grow them in your stead and then give you the products that resulted from those plants. And so the medical side actually started when dispensaries started filling the role of caregiver rather than the actual caregivers. And the caregivership framework is quite fascinating. It's still in place today by the Department of Health. But the important part was, in order for a shop to sell medical marijuana, they needed to act as a role of caregiver rather than a business owner. So if they are not growing at least 70% of the weed that they sell to their customers, then they're considered in violation of that. That is known as the 70-30 rule. No more than 30% of your weed, if you are a medical shop, no more than 30% of your weed can be purchased or sold as wholesale.
Well, I want to thank you for your time today, Daniel. I think you've provided our listeners out there with an excellent summary of the Colorado marijuana industry at present right now. It's obviously evolving. I think, though, compared to the Canadian marijuana industry, the Canadian marijuana industry at the federal level, there's the banks are fully financing that. There's credit cards allowed. They're allowed to export marijuana all over the globe. So I think there's a lot of advantages to the Canadian marijuana companies that the Colorado ones and a lot of the ones in the United States are not going to have. Now, with that being said, though, at a local level, there's still a lot of growth opportunities in there's Colorado's getting pretty saturated, but California, there's opportunities for growth, and Las Vegas is projected to have $500 million in marijuana sales in 2018.
That sounds all pretty impressive. Yeah, I don't think the market's near saturated at all. I think that the more weed we sell, the more people get a taste for it.
So you think then that the Colorado market has a lot more room to grow? It sounds like there's already a lot of marijuana stores there. When I interviewed Chris Walsh, he said there's a ton of cookie cutter chain companies already there operating in Colorado. Would you say that's not true?
There are a lot of chains and cookie cutters running around, but not everybody runs their business at maximum efficiency. And there's still a lot of trial and error. And there's still, frankly, a lot of untapped markets out here, I feel. I mean, our sales volume's not going to go up forever because a lot of our sales volume increases have been sustained by tourism. That's not going to fall away immediately when the weed tourists quit coming to us and start going to more proximate states. But we will always get tourists because we always have skiing, we always have national parks, and we always will have concerts. And those are the three main drivers of weed tourism, I would say. So as long as those other complementary industries can continue to be developed, I see no cap to how big the market can get in any practical sense anyway.
Well, as a libertarian, I'm just excited that there's even the opportunity for this, because it's been ridiculous what the federal government, the United States federal government has done with its war on drugs, with the scheduling marijuana as a Class D Schedule 1.
Mm-hmm. Schedule 1.
It's totally ridiculous. And how, like, if you go back through, hemp was grown during, I think, World War II. Hemp was grown during World War II for ropes. And, it's just totally ridiculous, the war on drugs, especially on marijuana, because I don't think marijuana is a gateway drug, and I don't think the amount of people that have died from a marijuana overdose, I'm not sure there really is any.
I see quite the opposite out here, actually. There are people who I've regularly worked with in the industry that have said, yeah, I'm a recovering heroin addict, and marijuana keeps me away from it. That's happened on several occasions. And these are people who are just fully functional adults who you just wouldn't presume these things about. There's just something about the way cannabis affects the brain that seems to help people with some of the most impossible addictions.
Yeah, I have friends who are using medical marijuana, and it's really, in different states, it's really helping them out with their health problems. So I have one friend on PTSD, another one with seizures, people with, very serious injuries, and it helps them reduce their pain. It's obviously helping cancer patients. So there's a lot of benefits to it compared to alcohol and tobacco, which are, legal. Yeah.
It's one thing to be skeptical about the medical benefits of marijuana until you watch it stop a seizure right in front of you,
Yes, and it also there's also a lot of research that it helps a lot with PTSD. So, and there's a lot of troops from Iraq and Afghanistan that have it, and it's helped them. And now stupid Jeff Sessions, who I think should be fired as the Attorney General, I don't think he's done anything right. He's making people's lives even more difficult.
He sure is. Veterans really flock to this industry because it's an industry that actually understands the health problems and the mental ailments that your typical veteran faces day to day. And so I can't even count how many veterans I've worked with, or how many veterans of mine have been customers, or who are even occasionally active duty, but don't tell anyone that.
No NFL players, right? No NFL or NBA players, hopefully not.
None to speak of so far, but if I ever run into any NBA or NFL players at my shop, I will make sure to be discreet. Celebrities need weed too.
Of course, man. Of course. I mean, just what the federal government doesn't understand. They think that they'll put all these new laws in place and that people are going to abide by them, but that's just not really how the world works. Adding hundreds or thousands of new. There's already so many laws on the books, and a lot of them are not even enforced, and they're not even enforced justly or fairly. They're selectively enforced.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that.
Well, Daniel, I want to thank you for your time today. And if our listeners want to maybe contact you for questions, maybe they're interested in getting your opinion on which places to visit in Colorado, or they're potential investors and they're thinking of moving to Colorado, how do they do so?
How do they get a hold of me? Probably the most direct way of getting a hold of me would be email. My email address is my first initial, D as in Delta, and then my last name, Peffers, Papa Echo Foxtrot Foxtrot Echo Romeo Sierra, or Peffers, at me.com. Me as in ME, the old iCloud domain.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your time, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, especially with the new announcement today from Sessions. Combined with Las Vegas, California, and Canada goes fully legal recreational, I think, in June or July. So it'll be interesting to see with that too.
Exciting times. Thanks for having me on the show. I had a lot of fun, Jason.